I'm struggling with the emotional reactions. Doesn't matter how I say something, the tone, the inflection, my 11 and 15-year-olds always thinking I'm yelling, scolding, reprimanding them.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Let me tell this, you're not alone and you're probably not imagining this, right? But what I want you to understand, what I can't do is make it stop. What I can do is frame it for you. And by framing it for you, what I mean is understanding it differently, right? These are kids who are emotionally brilliant, who are super sensitive to your every move. Not because they don't like you, but because they like you that much. Not because they fear you, but because they don't want to disappoint you. As a result, they are hyper attentive to your response. So the advice I gave you around the cold communication, that's the best strategy I have. What you don't want to do, in other words, you listen, you're calm. What you don't want to do is be activated by them, because it is sad when that happens to you. It's disappointing. The problem is that if you begin getting disappointed and you begin hovering them, or you begin yelling at them because they're not respecting you adequately, welcome to my adolescence, right? If you begin getting treated like that, then or treating them like that, then it's just going to escalate. Because if they listen to your words, I'm going to play your question back to you, right? What you said to us a few moments ago is, no matter what I do, it's like this. I believe you. This is a temporary period of time. If you react by escalating, then they're going to go through the roof. If you react by going, I think I understand this. They don't hate me. They're just super sensitive to my response. So I have to dial down the volume when I'm trying to communicate the same thing. And then reinsert whenever you can that concept that they couldn't possibly lose you, right? That's another thing that just settles the brain. Thank you for that question.
Are there different perspectives from the mindsets of those with autism spectrum disorder or other developmental disabilities as far as their advantages on their parents, aside from differences in theory of mind perspective taking?
So theory of mind is what I know best. I'm so glad that you asked that question, not because I'm an expert on it, but because I'm not an expert on it. And in deference to what my experience says, is that I almost always get that question at the end of talks. And I don't have my own knowledge deep enough to brilliantly answer it, which is why in my next book, Lighthouse Parenting, I forget the subtitle, but Lighthouse Parenting, there will be a book written by Dr. Eric Flake, who is a developmental pediatrician, dear friend of mine, know him from my work supporting the military. He's just retired Air Force colonel, he's a developmentalist, and he has written a chapter in the next book precisely for those parents of young people who are neurodivergent. And we are going to be putting stuff up very soon, like within the month, for Center for Parent and Teen Communication. So because the person who asked the question clearly knows a lot, I really want everybody to understand what they mean by theory of mind. And the idea is this: human development and human communication. And for the person who asked the question, because I just said that I'm not an expert on this, if I say anything that doesn't feel right, I would beg you to correct me in text, right? I would beg you. The idea behind theory of mind, well, in general, when we're learning to communicate, we're learning to really have social interactions and to read people. So all the stuff I talked about in terms of emotional brilliance is about really reading people, feeling what they're feeling, judging what they're communicating, and therefore tailoring your reaction to what it is that they did or what they communicated. Whereas for some people who are neurodivergent, that's just tougher. That's where there might be a disconnect. And that's what the theory of mind information is. So by learning how to, for example, practice with your child. So what Dr. Flake said, read all of my stuff, looked at all of my stuff, and basically said, it all works. All these basic principles of parenting work, okay, and know that your child needs more practice with these social skill sets, more role modeling, more watching objective things like TV or going on the internet and processing with you, what do you think this person is feeling? What might you say? So that the child can learn in a lower pressure context than the real world, which is, the power of role modeling. So again, the chapter in the book is not going to be long enough, but I'm hoping it's going to be the beginning of something much larger. Thank you for your question. I apologize for not being an expert on everything. Gilda, if you just asked something, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, why do kids lie?
Why do kids lie? That's a really, really great question. So, the concept of lying is something that's been actually studied pretty intensively. And one of the things is that there are different categories of lying. And one could make an argument. First of all, can you hear me? I'm hearing a lot of feedback, but you hear me? Okay, so I don't know what's on your end. I just need you to know it just went away, whatever you did. There are the kind of lies where, you say to your life partner, that shirt looks beautiful on you, right? And that's the kind of lie that is designed to spare someone's feelings. And in general, you could look at that as almost, this is the wrong word, almost an altruistic lie. There's a kind of lie which I've been very rarely criticized for promoting. One of the things that I promote very intensively is code word, which is the idea is that your kid's in trouble, they're in a social situation, you wish your kid could go, I'm morally, spiritually opposed to this behavior, I shan't participate. It's just that doesn't work, right? What can work is going like, are you kidding me? My mother's going to kill me, right? Or to call or text your mom or your dad with a code word, and when the code word is out there, then your mom or dad says, my child is in trouble. And when they know that you're in trouble, they demand that they're going to come and get you. So I believe that that's one of the most important things I put out there. I put it out there about 20 years ago. It comes from Mama Ginsburg, from my mother, from growing up, and it's utterly brilliant. And I believe it saves lives. And every once in a while, I will get a comment at the end of a talk, Dr. Ginsburg's promoting lying. I don't think so. I think I'm promoting saving lives in a way that works in a developmental context. And so I'm good with that. Let's keep going. Why else might a child lie? Can you still hear me, Gilda?
Yeah. Yeah, you see this question here. My teen daughter definitely is sensitive to injustice, social injustice, injustice among friends. When she's sharing her feelings about certain friends that she's realizing she's outgrown, how do I maintain a neutral perspective? Should I remain neutral? I don't know how to let her know I support her and agree with her decisions without making it seem like I'm engaging in gossiping with her.
Yeah. So let me finish the lie question, then I'm going to come back to it because I think we're having some connection difficulties. So the other thing I just wanted you to keep in mind is that sometimes children lie to protect us from the truth or from fear of being entirely rejected by us. So I want to build a world that is based on truth and justice and honesty. But what I'm telling you is that in your own home, if you have very clear settings that say, not settings, an understanding that says, you're not going to lose me no matter what. I believe you're going to get more truth. Now, for the woman who just asked, or I don't know if it's a woman, for the person who just asked about the fight between friends, what do I take? Stay out of it. Teach normal values about friendship, about loyalty, about all those things. Keep it general. This is actually, I'm going to make 2 points. This is actually incredibly well researched about what kids consider appropriate for us to enter their lives. They absolutely consider it appropriate when you enter their life for any safety issue or to learn how to get by in society. They absolutely consider that appropriate. When you enter their personal lives, that's about their makeup, the clothes they're wearing, or the friends they choose. They stop listening, push you away, and stop talking. So that's number one. But number two, listen to your child always and let them reflect. But when you take a side, so someone goes like, my friend, da da da, I hate her now. And you go, well, she was never good enough for you. I hate her too. Guess what? They're going to be best friends again tomorrow. And the difference is that your daughter's not going to come back to you because you've taken sides. Whereas when you were just listening and asking questions like, well, what lesson are you going to learn? How are you going to apply this to friendships? What might happen for you to repair your relationship? When you do that and you're a sounding board, you're teaching them the values, you're shaping them for the future without taking a stand. Taking a stand is going to lose you, your daughter, when she goes back. Now, do you never take a stand? Of course not, because safety, 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 safety. So if it's a friendship that is dangerous, in which case I wouldn't call it a friendship. But if, for example, your child was engaged in a situation that was emotionally violent or controlling, and you saw danger happening, or you saw that your child was suddenly becoming really good friends with someone who's always driving drunk, those are times where you can absolutely jump in. But what you're jumping in with is the concept of safety. You're not jumping in with, I don't like the choice of your friends. This person didn't treat you well. Don't do that. If you can't make it about safety, then you're going to lose. I love question answer periods.
You're so good.
I just love this.
What do you think is the biggest mistake parents make in general? Just on the big, and then we'll go small.
Oh gosh. That's almost too big a question for my feeble mind. If I had to say anything, it would be the belief that high expectations is about performance, right? We all want our kids to succeed, but when we make our expectations about what they're achieving, whether it's grades or trophies or scores, then what happens is kids never feel good enough or totally acceptable. And they can really become incredibly anxious or incredibly stressed. When, on the other hand, we understand that high expectations are really about who the kid is, like who they really, really are in terms of their values and their character and things like that, then you're honoring who the kid is, their being, instead of their performing, and they're not going to feel like they're going to let you down. The high performance culture, right? Great books about this. I mean, there's good stuff in my books on this stuff. I always write about this. You know, the original book by Madeline Levine, the most recent book by Jennifer Wallace. She just sent me one.
Yes, she was with us a couple weeks
Okay,
ago.
so you know
Great,
her. Okay.
which we have on our website,
Okay. Yeah.
Glenmore Parent Series. Yeah. Okay.
So you know, that is that's a mistake that we make, because what you want is for your child to launch from your home feeling successful. And when we make it about performance, most kids never feel successful enough. And when we make it about like being a good person, becoming a good human, we can make it so every kid launches feeling good about themselves. And honest to God, that's your goal.
You know, she talked to us about when you're so in sync with that book, Ken. She talked about how maybe consider when your child walks in the door, lead with lunch as opposed to the test score or performance or a grade. I know you. So
as you know, Gilda, I and most people probably don't know, but I work in crisis shelters. So the first thing you do is you feed the child, because
yeah,
when the
right.
brain is hungry, it's something so basic that
Absolutely.
makes you not feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
And once someone's fed, they're just smarter and wiser.
Yep. No. And we had Bruce Perry on a couple of weeks ago saying the very same thing. Child has to feel that those basic needs are met, that they feel wanted in the classroom, and so they can then access everything you've said about accessing learning. So when it
Gilda,
comes to
you are really slumming when you tell me like who you have. I'm like, I don't know if the people in this community understand. Like, she's literally dropping the names of the leading thinkers in the country. Like last week we spoke to, right? I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing it right.
Well, we have Ken Ginsburg after all.
Well,
So Ken, when it comes to communication, because I know you feel so strongly about that, what would you say that the mistake that parents make? A reluctant child, or really any child, what do we do wrong when it comes to communicating?
you know, you have to know who your child is, and they may not match who you are. You might be incredibly extroverted, they might be incredibly introverted. You might be someone who needs to talk out your feelings, they might need to be someone who processes their feelings. And when our children are different than us, it makes us really uncomfortable. Like when we have the perfect match, the daughter who talks about feelings the same way as the father, it's really easy for the father to start conversations. But when we aren't matched, and then we somehow think that the child is less than or incapable, it really interferes with our relationships. Which is why, Gilda, my first instinctual answer to, because you're asking some really large questions, and my first instinctual answer was going to be like, that Pat, they talk more than they listen. But I want you to know that that's literally what I just said, right? When you're leading with what you think is going to work, you're talking instead of listening, then you're not going to meet the needs of the child. And what you want is really, really your goal. This kid is going to be under your roof until they're 18. You want the next 50 years to have a really enduring relationship. That's literally the subtitle of my next book. I just can't think of exactly how we worded it. But how we parent today makes a difference in whether or not we be invited in their lives in the future. And when we talk and answer and dictate to our children, they run from us when they can. When we engage, listen, hear, guide, shape, they want us in their lives.
Can a couple more? Is that okay with you? A couple more?
Absolutely.
Okay. How do you know if and when to get involved if your child is failing a class in school? Let them fail so they learn? Question mark.
Yeah, very good question. So I would speak. The nice thing about schools is it's in that safety puzzle, right? Your child can't be hurt through a failure. They can be emotionally hurt. They might have, might affect their transcript, but it's a great place to learn in safe environments. The other thing about schools that are lovely is that your child is surrounded by child development specialists. That's what teachers are. That's what school counselors are. That's what superintendents and assistants, all of these people are child development experts. They're not administrators. They're people who have different skill sets, but who care and love children. So I would ask the teacher, because there are going to be many different circumstances that explain that child's failure, right? And until you know that circumstance, I'm not going to sit on a Zoom call and presuppose what it might be. Does that child have a learning difference that has been undiagnosed? Is that child depressed? Is that child acting out or using drugs, right? Is that child not putting in any effort? And if they're not putting in any effort, even that is only a starting question, because then the question is why, right? And if your kid starts with, I don't care. And if they're a kid of a parent who comes to a seminar to listen to some guy talk about how to raise kids, and your kid is telling you they don't care, I need you to know that they're lying to you. They're not telling you the truth. So the answer has to be the why. And the teacher's going to have a good idea of the why. And if there's a change, then something's going on in your child's life. And if it is that the child's always struggled with the subject matter, but now it got just that much harder, really look at learning differences. Gilda, you're on mute. I just need you to know that.
The other day, I was listening to the recording, the visit you had with us while COVID was just starting. And at that point, I remember vividly, I didn't even have to go back and watch it. You talked about if we use this time wisely as a family, we might come out of this even stronger, even healthier. Now we're out of this. What are you still hopeful
I'm
looking
still
back?
incredibly hopeful, but I'm also terrified simultaneously. So, permission to be frank. So, in the middle of COVID, what I was talking about was the concept of peace in the home, right? That when we make our homes, when the rest of the world seems scary, but we make our homes places where we support each other, we love each other, we give people second, we give people grace, then our homes will always be places that will be gone to for comfort. And I agree and I double down. At the end of the pandemic, the other point that I have said in many places, and you can Google these videos that I made, is that I believe we're sitting on what could be the greatest generation ever. Why? Because every single generation gets imprinted with their life circumstance, and it becomes their almost reason for existence. So, the easiest example is for us to think of our great grandparents or great grandparents, the Depression era people. They were frugal throughout their lives. The World War II generation had a can-do spirit. The 9/11 kids learned not to trust, right, or not to expect. So let's look at the COVID generation. What was the primary insult? The primary insult to their development was that of isolation. Gosh, they weren't able to hug their grandparents for a year, right? They weren't able to pray together, play together, learn together. And as a result, when they were able to get back together, being on a sports team, learning in school took on a whole new meaning. And seeing your grandparents and being able to hug them and have dinner with them suddenly became a wonderful thing. So I left the pandemic feeling deeply, deeply optimistic that this would be the generation that would be imprinted with the importance of human connection and togetherness, with the importance of drawing together to be stronger. That concept of bundle of sticks, right? As an individual, we are fragile as a stick. Joined with just one other person, we're nearly immovable. As a bundle of sticks, we are really impenetrable, right? So I felt deeply, deeply optimistic, and I still am, because I believe in youth. But gosh, if you don't mind me saying this, the adults are messing up so badly, right? Just when we need people to come together, we have the adults working really hard to divide us, to confuse us, to separate us. And I think that this amazing opportunity might be squandered. So, I began this talk like, I think maybe the third slide or something was me saying I'm speaking to you as parents, I'm speaking to you as youth advocates. Now I'm speaking to you as people who care about our nation. If we're going to take advantage of the opportunity of having the greatest generation ever, we better get our act together, right? We don't have to agree on everything, but we sure as heck need to stop putting out these incredibly divisive messages.
Now, this is the last question, and you've been so generous. What do you say to the kids when you get a chance to talk to the kids? What do you want them to know?
When I do an auditorium of kids, which I don't do very often, but the last time I did was in Wisconsin 2 weeks ago, and 900 young people in the room, and I ended with the greatest generation. They exploded in the most positive way you could imagine, right? So I maintain a very optimistic message with young people about who they are as idealists, as our future, and if they need to do things better than adults. And the kids really appreciate that message because they're in general receiving the message. So, full disclosure, Gilda, I think the mental health crisis message is backfiring terribly on kids. It's painting them with a broad brush of brokenness instead of taking the adult responsibility of why we're here. That's what Stand By Teens is. So, go to Center for Parent and Teen Communication and either go up to like the buttons on top that take us to social media, or to the article on the front page on Stand By Teens, and then go to social media. We are really trying to change the narrative, because we know scientifically that the message of mental health crisis, the crisis messaging about mental health, creates a sense of futility in adolescents. You know what I'd love people on this call to do? I would love to have you Google, like literally do this. This wasn't the talk I was giving, because it wasn't the talk I was asked to do, but just so you know, I'm not making this up. Google teen mental health crisis and go to images. And what you're going to see, you're not going to see kids like talking to adults and getting through problems. You're going to see kids like this, kids like this. So the images that went out with that public health messaging is the messaging of futility. You can't reach those kids. Look at those images and ask yourself, which kid can I reach? Which kid can I connect with? And the answer from the public health, actually, it's not the public health messaging, it's the popular press messaging after the public health messages get out there. So our message is Stand By Teens, show up, that's what they need. And by the way, this is an amazing generation, a resilient generation, a compassionate generation, a generation destined to teach us a whole lot. And that's the message we need.
This is what I learned. Create safe boundaries within which they can make mistakes. Hold them to high expectations to be good people because they rise to your expectations. When you care for yourself, you're modeling it's okay to be human and ask for help. Trust in their natural strengths and resilience to nurture their problem-solving capabilities rather than solving them for them. Let your children know they are loved deeply. Don't misinterpret their actions as they push us away. Be the expert of your own child rather than having them fit into idealized image. Know their temperament, their limitations, their potential. This is how they thrive. Have the confidence they can problem solve on their own. When we honor their need for independence and we trust in their decision making, they return to us for interdependence that offers them security for a lifetime. We're parenting 35-year-olds, our 35-year-olds. I love the analogy about the puzzle. There was a question about when do I intervene in a school problem? And you mentioned about how that's in the puzzle. So this is where we let them have these failures within our puzzle piece. Don't deny their emotions. Be careful with your judgment. I love this. When our lips move, I can just see it. That's it, right? That could be it right there. I love when you said you deserve to feel better, rather than there's something wrong with you. All wonderful. Now I have got some questions. How did I do? Is that okay? Is that good?
I think you should never have me back. You don't need me. The next time, what I want you to do is I just want you to do Gilda Ross is going to teach you how to parent. And maybe once you can say, like, I don't know, I know this guy Ken, but that was a fantastic synopsis. Thank you.
Well, there's so much inspiration in your wisdom. Drugs. Let's talk about drugs. Okay. You talked a lot about good communication, but role model for me a conversation about when I can go there. I find out my child has been drinking, and maybe they're self-medicating for some depression. I don't know. How can I have a conversation on this topic?
I love you so much. And as someone who loves you so much, I worry about you. And right now I'm worried about you because you're doing something that I know is harmful to your body. But I know something else about you. I know that you're so deeply sensitive and caring. And I know that the kind of people that often will turn to alcohol, sometimes they're doing it for fun. And sometimes they're doing it to get away from feelings. And I need to know How about you? Because how I'm going to be supportive to you, it's going to look different depending on why you're doing this. Right?
Beautiful.
See what I just did there? I started with what is good and right. And
Right.
I'll tell you, Gilda, I hate drugs so much. I have seen it destroy so many lives. There's literally nobody who's more anti-drug than I am. But I love kids who use drugs.
Yeah.
I really, really do. They are some of the most sensitive and wonderful human beings who haven't yet learned how to manage their emotions, right?
Right.
So now you have to work on two things. You have to work on helping them manage those emotions in a way that is productive, but you also have to deal with the reality. And the reality is that uh, when you begin using drugs, your brain begins getting wired differently. So, depending
Mm,
on how long your child's been using drugs, a simple conversation may not be enough. They really have to move away from drugs
mhm,
because drugs are authentically addictive. But,
mm, mhm,
it's, yeah, great humans generally,
mm,
deeply
mm.
sensitive people who are often just trying to get away from their feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feelings are good. You just have to
Yeah.
know how to manage them. And that's what good
Yeah.
parents can support their child.
So you've been in this field for a long time. What are you, what's your sense about, we're all so worried about the anxiety and depression that we're seeing in kids. So what's some perspective?
Well, there's no question that we have a problem, right? But
Mhm,
I'd like to really make sure that we put this in context. The first thing I'd like to do is there's a lot of things out there and a lot of messaging out there about the mental health crisis in
mhm,
adolescents. And I do not want this generation painted with a broad brush of brokenness. Instead,
mhm,
I want to acknowledge where the problem really is, which is that
mhm,
adults have really let kids down. And
mm,
we'll get to that in a minute. But there
mhm,
are many, many young people who are very resilient. And the thing is, you can be both. You can be highly anxious and deeply resilient. It's not like
Interesting.
you're in one box or the other, right? But what we want to do is we want to celebrate that our kids can feel, and we want to give them the guidance and the human support that's going to make them safe to get there.
Mm,
So the reason that I worry about the mental health crisis messaging, and I would love your audience to actually do this, is Google the term mental health crisis, look at and Google images and look at the images that come up. And the
mhm,
images that come up are all these images of kids covering their faces or looking into their hands. And the meta message, the message that's sent to adults is you can't really do anything with it. It's a message of futility, when in fact, adult presence is everything. So that's number one. Number two, what I would say is that uh, the uh, this has the potential of being the greatest generation we've ever had. And there's a reason for this, right? Every generation is imprinted in it by something big that happens to them, right? The 9/11 kids undoubtedly lost a sense of security. What did the COVID kids happen? COVID isolated us from one another. Gosh, these kids couldn't hug their grandparents for a year. They couldn't go to school together. They couldn't worship together. They couldn't play on fields together. That took a very, very big toll on adolescents, more than it took on other people. And I can explain that to you developmentally why that is, but it did. And but what that means is that isolation was the common experience of this generation. That means that in my heart of heart, my soul of souls, I believe this is the generation that is going to remind us that human connection is vital and healing.
mm,
And because they couldn't hug their grandparents, this will be the generation perhaps that teaches us to venerate the elderly again. I think the intervention is in place. We also have a generation that is comfortable talking about their feelings, right? So, we talk about all these rates. Well, guess what? I was a very depressed 17-year-old. And if you had handed me a piece of paper asking me if I was happy or depressed, I would have checked happy because it was 1979. So I want us to recognize the fact that kids are talking about what emotions they have. That's actually progress in some ways, right?
Mhm, 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 mhm. Here's a question about positive coping strategies that you feel that work. I know it's individual, but say something about positive coping strategies for us.
Well, we break them up into many categories. So if you go to parentingteam.com or you read any of my books, it'll tell you about positive coping strategies. But we want to break them up into a few broad categories. The first large category you break it up into is what is called the problem focused strategies. What do you do to solve problems? So within that category, I like to break it up into three categories. The first is break it up into small pieces. Break that mountain into hills. The second is know how to avoid problems, right? Just if there's a bully in school, take it on. If there's a bully in your neighborhood and he only acts up when you go to his corner, go around the block, right? Their life is too hard to confront problems we don't need to. And the next is let some things go. You can't solve everything.
It's good.
Okay? You can't solve everything. You fight where you can, or you lose it. That was actually the lesson of my mother-in-law, right? You figure out what you can change and you fight like heck. You figure out what you can't change and you let it go, right? Or they destroy you.
Yeah.
The uh, other categories are keeping your body healthy. We got to know how to exercise. We got to know how to relax. We got to know how to sleep. We have to know how to eat well. Then
Right.
deal with emotions. And we're going to deal with emotions. There's two things we want to do to deal with emotions. The first thing is we have to let them out. We have to express them. But sometimes we have to forget about them and not allow them to intrude our thoughts. So if you want to do drug prevention, you started with that, Gilda. If you want to do drug prevention, talking about feelings isn't enough. If the kid wanted to talk about feelings, he wouldn't have turned them off with drugs. So you have to do things. Over time, you have to help him learn to deal with his feelings. But in the short run, he might do something like read a book. Because when you read a book, you are immersed in something totally which doesn't allow for intrusive feelings to happen. You know, you're visualizing the panorama, hearing the sounds, smelling the smells, tasting the tastes, right? There's no room for your problems. And then the final piece of the stress reduction plan is learning how much you matter. You know, when people have a sense of meaning in their life and you know they can make a difference in other people's lives, can handle extra burdens because they know that they matter. So having this sense of contribution and making a difference is really important.
One of our last questions here is about a parent who is overwhelmed at work and she's trying to let that go when she comes into her home, so she can be there for her child, knowing how important that is. Do you have some suggestions for her?
Well, first off, you're already on the journey, right? And because you know how important your child is. But you are one human being.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
this is a perfect example where you want to be a duck flapping like this. If you really want to help your child, you say, it is so important to me that I am there for you that I really want to turn off from work. But it's not easy. Let me tell you what I do to wind myself down. And you actually share your rituals because when you look human, it's good. Let me say one other thing. I gave a talk yesterday at Covenant House, Pennsylvania, which is my home organization. And, I ended the talk with the best advice that I could give people who are starting in my field, who are generally about 40 years younger than me now. And the answer is this. For the person who asked the question, I don't know what you do professionally. But what I do professionally is bear witness to an enormous amount of pain. And where we really screw up our home relationships is where we look at our children complaining about small things, and we just want to say to them, are you kidding me? Do you know how much other people are suffering? Do you know how much you have it good? Well, the day you do that is the day you lose your family. So the person who is asking the question, if your day job is just that you work very hard, then show them how you come. If your day job is that you bear witness because you're in human services in one way or another, then the real advice I give you is to let your child be who all children should be. We want all children to complain that they don't like the way their hair looks. It's ridiculous, but that's the world we want. We don't want children to suffer. So don't bring home your job in a way that changes your expectations for your child, or who tells them that they don't have the right to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. This is my last question of the evening. Okay. Now you are in an elevator and it's a very tall building, but it's just an elevator ride. And you've got a parent of a teenager, and you just know that there's something you need to tell them for the course of this ride that you have with them, because it's right there in your heart. Like, I know you. So what are you going to tell them in this elevator ride?
Do you know that the two of you are going to be the most important people in each other's lives for decades to come? And Mrs. Patient's last name, you might feel right now like you're wondering how much you matter. You matter. And the biggest difference you can make for your son is that you just love who he is, even in those moments where he wants to pull out your hair. And hey, young man, let me tell you something. So many people, young people, get frustrated that their parents focus on their grades or their trophies or their scores. But let me tell you something. Parents want to be involved in your life, and what they get involved in, you're the one who controls that. If you choose to only share your grades or invite them to your games and not invite them into your emotional life, you don't have a right to be mad at them for not checking in with you, right? It would be like a teacher getting mad at a teacher who gives you a pop quiz and they never taught the subjects. You're the teacher. Make sure your mom knows who you are so she really knows how to support you. Oh, we're on the bottom floor. Have a great day.
Okay, this is the absolute last question.
How is that? I've never been asked that.
No,
Does that work?
perfectly.
I think we needed a 40-story building, but I think we got it. Like if I do a child audience or a teen audience, I make people cry for a living, right? And
Yes.
the thing that makes the kids cry is the knowledge that, because they're walking around like, why is my mother focusing on my grades and having no idea how much I'm suffering socially, and the fact that my friend doesn't like me anymore? Like, how could she not know that? And the answer is because you didn't tell her. You didn't tell her. If you're going to come home and complain about the grades, don't be surprised when that's what she talks about, right? And then kids go, right, to know that they have that power.
Well, okay. Now I have 20 pages of notes, and I feel so much better about the future. And how wonderful is that? And I hope you've done that. I have a sense that you've done that for all of us. I thank you so much, Dr. Ken Ginsburg. Keep doing the important work that you do. Without you in this world, we would really be at a loss, all of us here. And Ken, this is where we go hug our children. And so now we're going to hug them real tightly. Okay. Okay.
Right.
And you feel yourself hugged too. Okay.
I got it, Kilda. Thank you.
Thank you,
So
everyone.
much. Bye
Thank
now.
you. Thank you. Be well. See you next time.